Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
As we consider how they vote and the actual mechanisms through which people can vote, what they would need to provide to be able to exercise that key element of democracy, that is something that is the subject of debate right now on Capitol Hill as Republican lawmakers are pushing various pieces of legislation intended, as they say, to improve the integrity of elections in America. One such effort is being spearheaded by Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin, the chair of the House Administration Committee, who introduced the MEGA Act and talk to us about what it's intended to achieve earlier this hour.
I think it's common sense that we should require, for example, photo identification when an individual goes to the polls. I have to do that if you want to board an airplane, you want to open a bank account, or heck, you want to buy a six-pack of beer, you need to show photo identification. So it's common sense, it's popular. This is far from the takeover argument that some are attempting to make. It's putting in baseline standards so that all Americans have confidence our elections are being run accurately and fairly.
That's the chair of the House Administration Committee. We now turn to its ranking member. Congressman Joe Morelle, the Democrat from New York, is here with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. So you just heard your colleague's argument there, Congressman, and we appreciate you joining us. What is your response?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, it would be one thing if there was any degree of lack of confidence by Americans or there was evidence of fraud in America. None of that is true. Actually, elections come off very well. Local and state election officials do elections incredibly well. What this is really is the chaos and recklessness of the Trump administration, who the president knows the American people are very, very frustrated and angry what's happening with the Department of Homeland Security and ICE on our city streets. They're very concerned about the lack of affordability and how badly this economy is going. 70% of Americans think the economy is in worse direction than it was when Donald Trump became president. This is really a misdirection. It's a way, as the president has said, he says the quiet part out loud, a way to seize American elections, to nationalize them, take that power away from the states, and give voter data to the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know of anybody in America who thinks it's a good idea to give Secretary Noem access to private information that you supply when you register to vote. So I understand what my colleagues are saying, but this is really a misdirection play, and it's very, very frightening because Americans don't want their election and their midterms taken away from them.
Well, Democrats are not on board here, right? So I'm assuming this would have trouble passing the Senate when it comes to getting 60 votes. But how would you respond to what else President Trump would say? That Democrats want illegal aliens to vote because they vote Democratic. Well, look, the president has said this for years. He even said that Minnesota, which is very much in the news these days, and they tried to blackmail Minnesota into giving them the voter file for the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. But the president famously said, I won Minnesota 3 times. I never get credit for it. The truth is the president denies election results. He's done it around the 2020 election so far as having his head of national intelligence go at the direction of the Department of Justice to seize ballots from the 2020 election 5 years ago. It's like, get over it, Mr. President. Illegal people who are not registered to vote, who are not American citizens, don't vote in American elections. It's against the law. And it's a felony if you try to vote. So whenever you ask Republicans, could you provide evidence that non-citizens are voting? No, we just have a feel. Can you provide evidence that there's widespread voter fraud? No, it's just a feeling we have. So, look, these are solutions in search of problems. American elections are secure. Trying to suggest they're not is only trying to shake the confidence of American voters. We're not going to tolerate it, and we're certainly not going to let Donald Trump try to nationalize elections and take them for his own in 2026 in advance of the midterm elections.
Well, Congressman, you point at Minnesota as an example of where we're seeing this election debate, obviously very heated. But Minnesota, of course, has captured our attention for other reasons, including, of course, the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy at the hands of ICE officers. That is why Democrats are now demanding reforms to ICE. 10 is what your leadership was seeking, 10 changes that they would like to see in order to continue funding the Department of Homeland Security. We understand the White House Republicans issued a response. Your leader, Hakeem Jeffries, has described that counter as woefully inadequate. What is the minimum bar for you, sir, as to what reforms would be adequate, where compromise could be found?
Yeah, I don't think it's just Democrats. I think the American public has real concerns, and they've seen this unfold in videos in front of their eyes, and they can see what's happening in Minnesota. They also see that the Department of Homeland Security and the president continue to misrepresent what's in those videos, calling people domestic terrorists who are peacefully protesting, as is their right under the Constitution. I think the very minimum, ICE agents ought to act the same way that law enforcement does all around this country. No masks. You can see a police officer. They should have a badge. They should have body cameras. They should have to get, if they're going to search your home, they need to get a judicial warrant. That's embodied in the United States Constitution. These are fundamental rights which ICE is trying to take away in violation of the Constitution. We simply want to have the same kind of rules for ICE that you would have for any member of a local police force anywhere in the United States.
We've talked to a number of Republican lawmakers about this demasking issue and the identification issue, Congressman, and they are dug in on this. This is a deal breaker and a non-starter, and they point to the doxing and identifying and harassment of these ICE agents and their families. How do we continue the conversation from there? Because that's where the breakdown happens. What do you tell your Republican colleagues when you're not on camera and you're talking about issues in the cloakroom or at dinner?
Well, look, every police officer in America goes unmasked in communities where they live. So if there was people who are going to be targeted, it would be your local law enforcement who lives in the same community that they do public safety in. The truth is, this is just a way to intimidate people. It's a way to hide your identity. Frankly, I think it's dangerous for ICE officials and ICE agents, as well as certainly, and most importantly, dangerous for residents of our community. So it's a basic fundamental thing that we've had since the birth of this republic 250 years ago. These basic rules need to be followed, and we don't do it for FBI officials. We don't do it for local law enforcement officials. We don't do it for anyone in law enforcement. Why would we do it for ICE agents who are now swarming our streets all over this country?
Well, of course, as we consider the funding that backs those agents, Congressman, that was provided, a great deal of it, in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which already passed. It isn't necessary for DHS funding to be passed on Friday for that to continue. What it is necessary to continue, FEMA TSA does rely on DHS not shutting down. That is an argument your Republican colleagues are making. Why is it worth it to shut down DHS if it isn't necessarily going to impact ICE directly?
Well, what I would say is, if that's the case, and I think you're right, it is, ICE doesn't need the money. So why not fund the Coast Guard? Why not fund TSA? Why not fund FEMA? We could do all of that and not fund ICE as we continue to negotiate, because, as you point out, ICE already has the money they need. So why would they use ICE, which doesn't need the funding, to hold hostage the folks that do transit agents at TSS or TSA or the Coast Guard? For God's sake, the Coast Guard? You're going to defund the Coast Guard? So let's fund these other things. It's entirely appropriate while we continue to work towards trying to find common ground about the way ICE agents act out and when they're engaged in the American public. And be certain of this, Americans are very unhappy with ICE. It's very unpopular because they've seen two American citizens. These weren't so-called non-documented people. Two American citizens are dead within the last 3 weeks at the hands of federal agents. That's why Americans are so angry, and that's why they're with us on the question of how to reform ICE so that it represents the values of the American people.
Well, you're not just ranking member on the admin committee, Congressman, you're vice ranking member on the appropriations committee. How would that happen? I hate to warn you, we only have a little more than a minute left. Can you actually take ICE funding from the rest of that bill and essentially siphon that off from the rest? Would you have to create a whole new funding bill just for that department, or how would it work?
Yeah, maybe you just put it in the appropriation bill that's in front of the House, strip out the ICE funding, and zero it out because it has funding under the other bill. So you can do this. It would take no imagination,
can you get that done
no
by
creativity.
Friday?
Yeah, sure.
So then we don't shut down. Does Hakeem Jeffries support that?
Well, you'd have to ask him, but I'm pretty sure he'd be very happy if we did that, yes.
I'm just listening to you talk to Kailey. I think we might have just figured this out.
4 days in advance?
See that? Exactly.
Ahead of a deadline in Washington?
Deadlines.
I don't know, Joe.
So
Congressman, thank you for being with us. Yeah, exactly right. Joe Morelle from New York, the 24th District. That's up around Rochester, where I bet it's awfully cold today. And we appreciate the insights, Congressman.